All right, so we are doing our presentation on Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker. I am Santiago Rodriguez.
I'm Frank.
I'm Sam.
I'm Mary.
And I'm Vanessa.
All right, so I'm just going to go into some background on Richard. Uh, for the most of his career, from 1984 to 85, he killed around 14 people. And he got his name, the Night Stalker, as most of his crimes occurred in the cover of night. Richard would look for open windows and doors of his victims' homes, and this is how he got to most of them. He was a Satanist, and he left pentagrams on the walls and bodies of his victims, and he raped all of his, or all if not most of his female victims. It's just some early life. So Richard was born on February 29, 1960 in El Paso, Texas. His father, Julian, regularly inflicted physical and verbal violence toward his family, especially him and his mother. And at age 2 and 5, Richard suffered traumatic head injuries that would later lead to continuous epileptic seizures. Richard began to smoke marijuana at age 10, and this would later lead to greater drug addiction. At the age of 12, his cousin Miguel, which was a violent Vietnam War vet, showed him pictures of Vietnamese women's bodies, which he had dismembered and raped. And he had even taught Richard on how to kill with stealth. At age 13, Richard witnessed Miguel shoot and kill his wife, and he would later drop out of high school in the 9th grade and move to California. Next slide.
Internal factors. As Santiago was saying, his cousin Mike was a heavier influence on him. Being so young at the time, he would show him pictures, as he was saying, dismembered bodies, women he's raped, and even going as far as showing him how to use and become this stealthy person in the night. And as a young kid, he found that intriguing. He was a little sponge at the time, and he was just adapting it or just kind of taking all that stuff he had. Aside from that, he was influenced to drugs at that age as well from his cousin as well. So that not only just had he wasn't just only influenced by his cousin by just doing drugs and seeing the stuff that he saw through his cousin, but he then wanted to try the real thing, and later on got a taste for that and started to commit these atrocities later on in his life. Next slide.
So all of the murders he originally was convicted of took place between June 1984 to August of 1985. Although at first he was only charged with 13 murders, he committed 16, including the following, and they are also followed by their age. The ways in which he committed the murders varied between victims. The victims were either stabbed, shot, beaten, or strangled to death. And in one woman's case, 79-year-old Geneva Cow, he slit her throat to the point of near decapitation. It is important to note that the victims he chose differed from each other, as well as the ways in which he conducted the murders. Most serial killers have a specific type of victim that they hunt for and a specific way that they go about murdering them. Richard Ramirez did not, and that made his killing spree particularly unique. Next slide. Oh, one back. Sorry. Okay. Ramirez was originally convicted of all charges, including 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. And as for the sexual charges, almost all of the rapes took place in the victims' homes. The ages of Ramirez's rape victims varied from 9 to 81. He would also torture his victims while raping them, and in one case, he even tied up 2 women over 80 and electrocuted them with wires that he cut. Other notable facts about the crimes include he would sometimes mutilate his victims and the bodies as well. On one occasion, he mutilated the body with a machete, and on another, he stabbed a victim several times, then gouged her eyes out and placed them in a jewelry box, which he took with him as a trophy of the killing. On more than one occasion, he used lipstick to draw pentagrams on both the victims' bodies and the walls where the crimes took place. He also made at least 4 of his victims swear to Satan, and in one instance, when he gave himself the infamous name of the Night Stalker, he forced his victim to swear she loved Satan as he beat her with his fists and bound her with neckties. This victim later played a huge role in identifying Richard Ramirez. Next slide. The picture in the top left corner shows the pentagram drawn in lipstick above the victims' beds. The picture in the top right corner is a shoe print collected from the crime scene, and for a while was the only evidence that the police could find on the crimes. And then the picture in the bottom right is a facial composite of Richard Ramirez next to his mugshot. Next slide. So how he was captured. The police were able to collect a fingerprint off of a car that Ramirez had stole from one of his victims. This is how they were able to identify him, and at a police press conference, it was announced, "We know who you are, and soon everyone else will. There will be no place you can hide." Unaware of this, Richard Ramirez returned to East LA, where most of his crimes took place, and entered a convenience store where people began to recognize him. And then Richard Ramirez soon saw his face on the front page of a newspaper and fled. He attempted to carjack a woman, but was chased away by bystanders who pursued him, and then he attempted to carjack 2 more women and was eventually subdued by a group of residents, and the group held Ramirez down and relentlessly beat him until the police arrived and took him into custody. Being caught by civilians is yet another fact of Ramirez's story that is very unique. Next slide.
Ramirez waited in jail and his trial was continuously pushed off. Some of the charges against Ramirez were dropped in order to expedite what was coming a long journey to justice. The jury selection process finally moved forward on July 22nd in 1988, and the trial itself commenced the following January. During the time, Ramirez was attracted a cult-like following of supporters. Another delay occurred when the juror was found murdered on August 14 in 1989. It was believed that Ramirez had something to do with it, but there was no evidence that connected to the crime. Next slide, please. For his sentencing, his trial began in early 1989, and in September he was convicted of 13 murders and a variety of other crimes like 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. Like we mentioned earlier, it was believed that he committed a total of 16 murders, but he was never charged for all of them. After 2 months, he was sentenced to death in the gas chamber, since his crimes were seen as cruel and he showed no remorse. During the trial, Ramirez gave a monologue in which he warned, quote, you don't understand me, you're not expected to, you are not capable of it, and beyond your experience, and beyond good and evil, I will avenge Lucifer dwells in us all, that's it. In this trial, 2 of Ramirez's siblings were present, 2 victims who survived the attack, and the 4 jurors who have found him guilty in the previous trial. He was incarcerated at San Quentin State Prison near San Francisco, California. Next slide.
So an interesting part of his incarceration was the amount of letters that he received from fans as well as visits, and most of whom were women. These women found him attractive and wanted to engage in romantic relationships with him, regardless of the crimes he had committed. And in 1985, Doreen Leoy, a freelance magazine editor, reached out to him with 75 letters. They later got engaged in 1988, and in 1996, they were married in San Quentin State Prison and later divorced in 2009 when his crime of rape and murder of a 9-year-old was found to be true. At the time of his death, he was allegedly engaged to a 23-year-old named Christine Lee. And here are some pictures of the wedding here at the prison.
The horror began in June 1984. Los Angeles was under siege. Death waited in the dark at the hands of a man they called the Night Stalker. After a 14-month reign of terror, he was finally caught. It was only then that his true identity was discovered. His name, Richard Ramirez. Richard Ramirez's whole trip was to hide in a tree or hide behind a fence and watch his victims at nighttime. Wait until the hours of the night. And then, while they slept, creep in, like a collar, and kill him. The Night Stalker killed at least 13 times, 13 people who were awakened in the night to face death. At least 15 others survived his brutal attacks. In a rare interview, Ramirez refused to discuss his own crimes, but had this to say about serial killers. A serial killer comes about by circumstances that risk, poverty, drugs, child abuse, things that contribute to a person's frustration and anger. At some point in life, perhaps for Richard Ramirez, that anger and frustration turned to rage, which he in turn took out on his victims. His killings were so sadistic and brutal that even experienced detectives were shocked. He took a woman in her 60s and stomped her to death with his foot, leaving an imprint of a shoe on the side of her face. From that to just executing somebody upon walking into a room after he entered a house, strangled, used a ligature, used a tire iron on a young girl, beat her, left her for dead. When your anger subsided, you had to wipe up your mother's blood. I couldn't finish it. I had to leave my brother to finish that chore. Why on earth? Why did you kill those people? I cannot answer at this time. What was Richard's motive? To kill? That's it. To kill. Simple as that. Richard Ramirez was raised in El Paso, Texas, the youngest of 5 children born to hardworking, strict parents. Eddie Milam was Richard's best friend back then and remembers when he began to change into a troublemaker. Something was wrong with him. At the really the mom was acid, a lot of acid. The stealing, I noticed the stealing. Ramirez's passion for burglary earned him the nicknames of Ricky the Thief and Fingers, but Eddie knew Ramirez had other serious problems when he was fired from a local hotel. By 18, Ramirez was a high school dropout, drifting around California. He stayed in Skid Row hotels, never seemed to work, but always had the money to buy cocaine. Friends say that Richard Ramirez, they knew, didn't date and wasn't the type to commit such heinous crimes. But convicted murderer Martin Kipp, who befriended Ramirez in prison, says he heard another side of the nightclub. She told him he needed to associate loosely violence with sex in order to be completely satisfied. He also reported that he had to violently fantasize about his victims before he could go away sexually gratified. Their desires were experts felt there was no one Night Stalker. Detectives Carrillo and Salerno disagreed and finally broke the case by matching shoe prints. The subsequent trial